From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Glad to have you back again for another week where we talk about all the things that are going on in the city of Chicago, or at least some of them, things that are interesting anyway. And today we present for you two shows because we're going to do another show immediately following this one to talk about the Sun-Times reader trunk situation. So you'll want to hang around and watch for that too, I think. But as we're recording this show on Thursday morning, America's, pretty much just transfixed on the Judiciary Committee hearings live on every television, everywhere you can find one. And maybe by the time you see this show, you're going to have a clearer picture about what it all means to the Trump presidency. But our show focuses mainly on local issues where Donald Trump's also having a huge impact. He pulled out of Paris, and our mayor, along with dozens of others, says we're going to honor the spirit and to some degree the letter of Paris. But just what that means really isn't very clear to us here in Chicago. Also, the president's running around the country having press events to tout his $1 trillion investment in infrastructure, something that should be pretty much beautiful music to every mayor in the country. But what does Rahm Emanuel do? He says it's fairy dust because it's actually just a series of used cuts to states and cities with the hope that they'll be able to find some private money somewhere else. And that sounds just a little bit like the Mayor's Infrastructure Trust, doesn't it? About 1 million times bigger, though. Anyway, there's lots of hot developments in the red-hot Illinois governor's race, except for the one problem that it's like, what is it, a year away, the primary? So why are we getting so worked up about it now? Well, you got to ask Mary Ann Ahern. Mary Ann Ahern covers stories like these and has for years for NBC5 Chicago, where she's a political reporter, and we're so happy to have you back here at the table again. Mary Ann, thank you for coming back.
Of course, Ken. Thank you.
I always appreciate it with folks like yourself because you're so incredibly busy and you work on these amazingly short time clocks. So to be able to come over here and spend half an hour with us is really wonderful. So thank you very much. And also belated congratulations on the Silver Circle.
Hey,
you were inducted
I said
into
the old
Silver
lady
Circle.
club.
Well, I was
I'm
trying to
part
figure
of
out
it.
a polite way to say that it's a kind of a
What would it be?
two-edged sword, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you're being honored for a lifetime of really good service. And on the other hand, you have to have been in the business for 25 years to get it.
Or
so,
more.
Or more. Yeah.
It's a wonderful honor.
But
Thank
it is.
you.
It's great.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations for it. So I assume you were driving over here like I was, listening to Comey testifying. Obviously, by the time people see this show, people tend to watch our show like over the weekend more than anything. So by the time people are watching or listening to us, they know way more than we do now. But any just immediate responses?
Well, in the initial testimony that he had at the very beginning, which he didn't read his statement, I thought that was sort of interesting. I thought he was going to. I wanted to hear him say it.
Yeah.
But I did that when he talked about, well, I didn't know if he would lie, referring to the president. So that's why I felt I had to write this down.
Right.
And I was still in the newsroom at that point, and everyone in the newsroom kind of went, whoa, that's really not something you want to say about your boss.
Right.
You didn't know if he would lie.
And this was his third president, and he didn't feel that way about the other two, Obama and Bush. So, yeah. But, again, it's kind of silly to be putting too much weight on this because these hearings are going to go on long beyond when we're talking this morning. But I thought that Marco Rubio and the Republicans are making some dents in him already. I mean, of course, they've been practicing this. But, they're basically saying, okay, so what were the three things that he did? He asked you. He didn't exactly say, I'm ordering you to drop this investigation. He just said, boy, I really hope there may be something you can do for me about this. And, we're from Chicago, right? I mean, if you've ever hung out behind, in the ante room at the city council chambers, it's the grab the wrist. I sure hope you can,
Even Senator Feinstein, she said to him, hey, you're big and strong. Why didn't you ask him? Or why didn't you say to him?
Why didn't you say something, yeah.
And I thought his answer, though, was quite, hey, if I relived it, maybe I would I wasn't quite sure what to say. So I felt that he was credible, but you did kind of think at the same time, okay, you've been the FBI director, you knew this wasn't right. Why didn't you just go ahead and say it to him?
Right. And you knew that this Trump guy was going to be different about everything. Everything he does is going to be different than you were accustomed to before.
But still, Ken, what's wrong is wrong.
Yeah, I know.
You know, and it's still...
It's not even a question of that. To me, it's just a question of what do we think is going to come out of this? And I'm suspecting that he might get a little bit damaged in these hearings.
Yeah. I wonder where it's all headed, especially with a Republican-led, Senate and House. Folks going in had preconceived ideas, and most likely coming out are going to say what they had thought beforehand.
Well, can I change subjects quickly here? Because we're talking about people being damaged. The tapes that got played the other day of J.B. Pritzker having this pretty explicit conversation with Blago. I think there was it was one of these, there was a conventional wisdom for about 5 or 10 minutes that, oh, he's toast, he's done for. And then 15 minutes later, no, he's once again anointed and will be the Democratic. Put this into some
let's go back on this a little bit. So, first of all, we have the story that J.B. Pritzker and his property tax appeals. So that story breaks.
Right.
And as I hear it, everyone's wondering, where did they get the tapes? And who knows if this is absolutely correct, but that the Tribune was sort of, why didn't we know about that property tax? So they start digging. And their reporter who had written one of the books on Blago, I think I recall, And so they find these tapes. And yes, the tapes are damaging because everyone in the world at this point, this conversation, one of them was literally a week before the former governor is arrested. If you didn't know that he was under investigation, you had to be under a rock at that point. I mean, we all knew for about 2 years. So to have that kind of conversation and laugh about your sister's bank, and Blago says, oh, Superior Bank really was inferior bank, ha ha ha, and they both laugh. And then asking a couple of times about this treasurer. Nothing, I mean, that's what folks do.
Right.
They definitely ask. But there was this implied, how much money are you going to give me for it kind of deal. So now a week later, 5 days later, the AFL-CIO, whoa, we're going to endorse Pritzker. Well, changes the subject certainly. It's way too early. Way too early. What, we're 10 months or 9 months away from a primary race. The old adage of Labor Day, boy, that's blown out of the water.
Well, this is a different kind of Labor Day now.
But let's also remember that the AFL-CIO endorsed Dan Hines in the U.S. Senate race against Barack Obama.
Good point. Very good point. Oh,
And
yes, President Hines.
That didn't really work out for him. So, I mean, the public has barely, other than now his constant commercials, both Rauner and Pritzker, but have not certainly had a chance to hear and see them in person, to measure all of the candidates. And now we have a couple of new ones even this week. So, wow. To try to push aside and say he's our guy this early, the Democrats are making a big mistake.
I'm kind of reminded of, I don't know, it's like a New Yorker cartoon from years ago or something about, the board of directors has voted 7-5 to wish you happy birthday. I mean, because he didn't get just enough votes to make the endorsement. I mean, it wasn't exactly an overwhelmingly enthusiastic piling on.
Right. And other unions, SEIU, AFSCME, the Illinois Federation of Teachers, the CTU, they're all saying, let's give it a little more time. Let's hear what they've got to say.
So one theory that I've heard knocked around is that the powers that be, I guess Rahm Emanuel and whoever,
Speaker
Madigan, that they wanted this so that they could lock up the union money. It's not obviously that Pritzker needs the union money. He could buy and own the union if he wanted to, but it locks it away from the other candidates.
Well, and that the union might not have to give much money to the governor's race, but instead focus on some races further down. Some heated House and Senate races that they have lost a couple of them to Rauner. So if Pritzker doesn't really need their money that much, maybe he needs the feet
on
on
the
election
ground.
day, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
that this allows them to spend their money on those races further down the ladder.
Interesting. So I guess we have a sense of why the Democratic power structure wants him, a billionaire against a billionaire.
Right.
But I was at First Tuesdays on Tuesday night, and one of the sentiments there was, this feels a lot like kind of a replay of Hillary Clinton. It's like everybody's telling you this is who the candidate's going to be. Shut up. This is the candidate, and there is so little enthusiasm for that candidate that maybe Rauner wins.
And we certainly have seen the Bernie Sanders folks of the party, the progressive Democrats. Are they going to embrace J.B. Pritzker when he was such a Hillary supporter as well?
Yeah.
So the Amaya Pawar, Senator Daniel Biss certainly don't have the money, but they've got a lot of ideas that folks are very attracted to.
Yeah.
And so to cut them off and to say to Chris Kennedy as well, we don't thank you, but no.
Yeah.
I think it's way too
Yeah,
early.
it does seem like it's off to a kind of a bad start for the Democrats. That's the way it feels to me. And you can't discount the fact that we have a governor who has almost unlimited access to money. Even if he runs out, he's got rich friends who can fill the bucket.
He's
back
already
up.
set the bar at 70 million.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
and another thing that I think we tend to forget in our little media island up here in the blue state of Chicago is that Rauner is very popular in Illinois. I mean, we find that impossible to believe, but he is.
He is downstate and in the collar counties. This week he was along Hegewisch, the Indiana-Illinois border, speaking with some businessmen who say, thanks a lot, everybody's going to Whiting. We've got businesses up and down the street that are closing down. You've got way too many regulations, too many taxes. And we interview him afterwards, and a guy who had been at the event says to me on my way out, is your job just to harass him? And I said, oh, gee, I was trying to be nice. I said, oh, you ought to see me when I meet the mayor. I said, my job is not to be his public relations.
Right.
And so, yes, I am here to ask him some questions that might seem a little uncomfortable at times, but that's how it goes. So, there are certainly folks who support Rauner and say they like that outsider. They like his message of what he has to say. And for all those folks who think the polls say he doesn't have a chance, I forget it. I don't think I'll ever believe another poll again.
Yeah, right.
So
especially when it comes to these kinds of issues, kind of like this whole dual bubble kind of stuff, because everybody's lying to the pollsters. They're just not telling them the truth about what they really feel or what they really think. So anyway, but of course, maybe we're all wasting our time because Scott Drury is going to become the nominee, right? Whoever that is.
I know.
We have a new.
I said, what if he's going to run, and I didn't even get one email? I said, hello, Scott, I'm over here. You might want to send me an email and just let me know.
So what does Amaya Pawar do, or Daniel Biss? What do they do at this point?
Well, they're working hard, obviously, on raising some money and on getting their ideas out there through social media is one big way that they're out there. They're traveling the state. They're holding town halls. They're meeting with people. They're hoping that whether it's a small little army of theirs that says, "Hey, don't forget we care about schools and taxes as well, and we don't want to be cut out of the process." But boy, it's very hard for them to get some traction up against guys like Kennedy and Pritzker.
Well, this really brings us to the journalism question, doesn't it? Because I mean, I don't know, honestly, and I mean this in the most sincerely respectful way. I just don't know how you and your colleagues do your jobs, because what is your budget? They give you, 48 seconds to cover this. I mean, and if Pawar had something interesting to say, what would be the chances that he would get cameras to his event? And even if he got cameras to his event, how much of it would get used. It would be
Right.
about an 8-second clip if he was lucky.
Right. This week I did.
And I say that not as a
No,
criticism.
I understand.
I
Yes.
can't imagine what it must be like.
Even things like, I did reach out to him this week about the Pritzker tapes and about the AFL-CIO. Luckily, I knew that was going to happen, so it was kind of a 2-for-1. But here's how, and this works is, poor, can you meet me on a street corner? He would come in a second, and they all would probably.
Yeah.
Pritzker, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Wait a second, what are you
Right,
going to
right.
ask me? But, you try to get them, and yes, 10, 12 seconds appears that night on the news. And you feel like, well, I did reach out to him. I did try to include him. Same with this, same with Kennedy. But when they're not able to already run those commercials that you see constantly.
And the sort of double irony of it is that if you do a package that includes this tape and he's on for 12 seconds, the message is this guy is an also ran, right? I mean, this guy is not in the same league as the others. He's just getting a little clip in there. I mean, I don't, as I say, I'm not saying, I don't have a formula for how to fix that, but it's really, really difficult when you are the guy who doesn't have any money against a well-heeled campaign. But when you're up against what we're up against now with, quadra-billionaires, I mean, I just don't,
I know. That's the part, it's really sad that my photographer and I driving along the other day, you can't just be a millionaire and run.
No, millionaires.
You need to be a billionaire. And if
Kennedy.
you can't be a self-funder, good luck to you.
Right.
You better have then some other big support. And so losing that labor support, that would have really helped either of them.
Do you think this is going to burn out, this fascination we have with gazillionaires?
Boy, I hope so. Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't it, though?
Yeah.
Maybe Illinois is going to be the place where it's going to burn itself out because, I mean, it's just so completely out of proportion now. And the idea that the Democratic leaders are just kind of like giving up and saying, well, we got to have our own billionaire and this guy is acceptable.
And yet we've seen in the past, the billionaires in the past, maybe, Blair Hull and Ryan, they fizzled. And that's why I say it's way too early, for someone who wants to just run because they're bored and yet I'm sure Pritzker has good intentions as well. He'd like to be the governor. He ran for Congress
and he has
before.
a fairly decent track record. And,
you can't buy it. You gotta work it.
Right, that's right.
And that's the part.
Which is probably why he was asking Blago for that job. He wanted to be treasurer so that he could work his way up or something. So can we talk about Illinois politics and the mayor? I'm really fascinated by the whole kind of Rauner Rahm thing that just seems more and more complicated all the time. And it manifested itself recently in this school board vote. It looks like the Illinois legislature is going to pass a bill mandating an elected school board in Chicago. How could the mayor have let that happen? He's so against it.
I just I'm like, whoa. How long has that been now? Like 25, more than that. 28 some years.
Yeah.
And even though everywhere else they are elected,
right,
except for Chicago, is there going to be a trade-off somewhere down the road that we're going to push that aside and maybe we'll agree to a few members are elected, half is elected? I can't imagine this is what the mayor would want.
But now I'm having a hard time following this, but as I understand it, the House passed it, then the Senate, or House first, then the Senate, right? And everybody assumed that because the Senate changed it, it would go back to the House and that would deadlock it for another year and the mayor would get another 4 years or something. But instead, the House looks like it's going to say, okay, we'll just take your changes, which means it lands on the governor's desk, which means the governor has to give Karen Lewis what she wants, her elected school board.
Wow.
And really screw the mayor, but maybe he doesn't mind screwing the mayor at this point. What's going on? Explain this to me. You're the politics reporter.
I wish I knew that one. Isn't that something? That's delicious. Wow. That's to figure that one out. Oh man.
But of course, it'll be delayed for 4 years, right? So Ron won't have to deal with it until his 4th term.
Oh man, well, would it really? Oh my, oh my. Yeah. Ooh, I think there's still some backroom deal on that
But
one.
by that
before
time,
it all happens, and
you think there's going to be a little conversation? Yeah. Sort of
That
like
is
one
interesting.
of these.
I mean, I know, and so many people have wanted this. I mean, the referendums have all said, people in the neighborhood, everyone has said, let us vote for the people. And let the people who really want to be on the school board. I often think, can you imagine getting that call from the mayor? I really need you. I want you to do school board for me. You got to go.
All you have to do is vote everything I say.
Yeah, that's got to be like, oh boy, how's that work for Andrea Sopp? Not so hot.
Well, you know, Paul Vallis was, Phil Cadner did a column talking with Paul Vallis, who you would think would have been, you know, like A1 first class mayoral appointment school board, since that's where he got all his power.
Right.
But now he's saying maybe there ought to be some kind of compromise, a hybrid. Maybe the mayor gets 4, the community gets 3, or something, or the community gets 3, the mayor gets whatever.
I really think that's how it's going to end up, something like that. I can't imagine they give up his entire appointments, but boy, you never know.
I mean, the argument has always been that, you know, the unions and the other forces, whatever it is, the so-called school reformers, the charters and everybody else, they will just all put millions and millions of dollars into these silly little neighborhood, races for school board seats. But I mean, that's another whole issue too, is whether they should be in communities, that whether like the county board, it should be by
right, because the same thing will happen is those schools that are already performing so well are going to have the people that want to run and want to be a part of it, and then the schools that need the help, who's going to really step up.
Right.
Yeah, they've got some work on that.
It's going to be really interesting. We talked earlier about Mayor Emanuel's infrastructure plan and the fairy dust comment. I got to say that none of us, I guess, really know exactly what the heck the president is talking about, this $1 trillion that he wants to spend. But it sure does look to me like it's just a series of announcing things that Obama had already done and re-announcing them, and cutting money everywhere so that people, the municipalities have no choice other than to try to go find somebody else to give them money.
Right. And the mayor, because of where he stands on so many issues, whether it's the Paris climate change, sanctuary state, you know, now the police reform, he's got to wonder, are the feds going to send him anything?
Right.
You know, when he has talked about extending the red line and the improvements to O'Hare and all of this.
Yeah.
And will there be one check from the federal government to Chicago in the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really kind of confused by a lot of those things that you just ticked off there. The sanctuary cities. It's not exactly clear that Chicago has all of the muscle that it seems to be saying it has in this. What was the other thing we just talked about there a minute ago? You listed the sanctuary cities, the
red line, as well as climate change.
Oh, climate change. That's the one. I mean, it's like, I noticed that the Hancock Center put some green lights up one night, but I'm not sure that Chicago really has I'm happy to be proven wrong on this. I'm speaking from some ignorance here, but it doesn't appear to me that the Chicago has a really carefully thought out, comprehensive plan the way I'm seeing maybe New York have, or Hawaii.
Right. I mean, there was so much talk of, in the Great Lake, here we have the beautiful resource of Lake Michigan. And we had bipartisan support to make sure. I mean, Senator Kirk and Durbin were so big on that. And what, are we going to let Lake Michigan, are we going to let, the steel plants already over in Gary, we're going to just, again, just fire on up and throw your stuff into the lake? I hope not. But you're right. What exactly? The mayor has done a few things. There's been some Pilsen coal plants, that kind of stuff that he has helped in negotiating them to stop. But what does he mean beyond that? Having a nice river fund is lovely, and it does look lovely, but there's more to climate change than that.
Yeah. And, I mean, I don't want to be too nasty about this, but despite all the community effort that was put forth on those coal plants, I've always maintained that they got closed because they just became too expensive to run. I'm sorry, I hate to say that to all the people who've spent all their lives fighting those coal plants, but if coal was still the cheapest option, they'd still be burning coal.
Right.
That's the way I see it. But anyway, we've yet to see, I think, a detailed and comprehensive plan from the mayor on exactly what his Paris-friendly policy is going to be.
Well, when it comes to the details from the mayor, we have yet to see a detailed policy on how he's keeping the schools open these next 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so if you want to go to something more esoteric as climate, how about just the everyday running of the city when it comes to that? Here the schools are open, they're borrowing some more money, but, yeah.
We're cooked, is what you're telling us. Yeah. You want to just switch topics completely and talk for just a minute? In our next segment, we're going to be talking about the Tronc Reader Sun-Times thing.
Yeah.
I know you've reported on that. You've done some coverage of that. Do we need to be alarmed about the consolidation here, the idea that one individual or one closely held company would own all of these newspaper voices?
For sure. It's such an awful, horrid thing to think that we will not have maybe two options. And it's not going to happen immediately. Even if Tronc does take over, I think it will take some time.
Yeah.
But, the competition is just so fantastic. It keeps people on their toes. And once you have one newspaper, it's sort of this, okay, we'll get to it. I mean, there's not that, we see it already in sometimes our own. When we know that there are other political reporters out covering the same story, we want so much to be the first one to break it and have all the big details. To only have one doing it would be just so devastating to the city.
We had Mark Brown on the show last week, and he was here with Hal Dardick, and it was a very funny moment because he said, talking about something, and said, well, I got home really late that night because I had to sit in the office and try to pick up the story that you did about Blago's tapes, right?
Yeah.
And that is a dynamic that you can't duplicate when everybody works for the same guy. I mean, it just doesn't, it's just not the same. Right. And that's been going on in Chicago forever. I mean, for as long as there's been Chicago almost, you've had these vicious battles between reporters trying to get the story. And I mean, I know, you guys are going through some of this too. The whole Channel 9 thing is to me very disturbing, that this magnificent piece of Chicago history, Chicago's very own TV station, is now going to be taken up by some out-of-town entity that really, the most benign thing you can say about it is that they won't really care very much about what Channel 9 does. But I just don't like it. I don't like the feeling of it.
No, I don't think anyone who's for the free press would like it. And Jim Warren, who's a media writer for several publications, including Vanity Fair, says, it's about making sure that folks get up in the morning and want that content, and you got to figure it out online, and it's free.
Right.
And so, how do you get them to pay for it when you can get it for free? That is the challenge. The genie's out of the bottle. So now how do you come back and say, oh, wait just a moment, you got to pay for a little of this?
It's really interesting to me that we've had this conversation in a lot of different ways over the last 10 years or so, but one of the most important resources our city has, as important as sewer and water lines and everything else, is newsrooms. News gathering operations. Yours, the major TV stations, a little bit of radio, but those two principal print newsrooms are much bigger than anybody else. Even the Sun-Times is still bigger than most other newsrooms. And what they do is so critical that I was interested to ask you about this. Everybody says this, but you could verify this. I mean, you guys must, in your morning meetings take into account what's in the Tribune and the Sun
Oh
Times?
my goodness!
I mean,
of
they help
course.
drive your agenda.
Of course.
Because you can't possibly have the number of reporters out there doing the kind of things that they're doing. So when you come in and you see, whatever the story is, whatever the big story is today, you got to pick that story up.
Absolutely.
And I just hate the thought of that being lost.
Yeah.
I really do.
We have new interns this summer, and one of the interns that's with us, I said to her, here's what you got to do before you come to the morning meeting. Get up a half hour earlier than you used to, and you got to read the papers, and you got to look at the editorial page even. And you got to look at a couple of websites, Capital Facts and Natasha Korecki's Illinois Politico.
Right.
And come in with a couple of ideas every morning.
Yeah.
And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing your job.
That's right.
That's how you start your day.
And I think that part of the thing is that we get caught up in the feeling of them being newspapers, and newspapers are obsolete. As I say 1,000 times here, the Dead Tree edition is going away. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because what we have to preserve is the intellectual force that drives that product. And even if we all get all of our information online, it's still the same process.
And we see what's going on in Washington of just more and more reporters covering the White House and covering Congress. It needs to trickle to other cities as well.
And it's just what we've been talking about too there, right? It's like, what's the solution for journalism? What's the saving grace for journalism? A billionaire, all right? You get a couple of billionaires who are willing to get in the game and play hard.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're hiring reporters, and the New York Times and the WAPO are just fighting each other hammer and claw. They're like every 20 minutes they're topping each other. And so in a weird way, we're living in a little bit of a golden age of journalism. It's just a tiny little bubble.
Right.
All right. Well, anyway, I guess we've come to the end of our time here. Did we miss something really important?
You know what? There's always it isn't. There's no deadlines anymore. The state budget and Joan Lefkoe, perhaps. That might the federal hearing. We'll see.
Yeah. Let's take one more. We'll steal one more minute away. Let's talk about that a little bit. Judge Lefkoe, she ruled. Well, what did she do that was so important?
Well, Susana Mendoza, the comptroller, is saying, you know what? I can't prioritize these payments. And Medicaid and the providers, the healthcare providers, are saying you guys are way behind. Mm-hmm. And we're pretty soon here. They're not going to start. The doctors are going to say no to Medicaid patients because they haven't been paid in so long. Yeah. And so they've gone to court and asked her to make a ruling and say put the Medicaid people at the top of the line. And she said, well, we'll keep negotiating for 2 weeks. Let's see if we can get this. I agree. We have a consent decree, and you guys are supposed to get paid. I'm not putting you at the top of the line yet, but work on this, the state and the Medicaid providers. If you can't come to a solution, come see me in 2 weeks. If that happens, someone else doesn't get paid. Pensions or schools.
Because there's just not enough money even for pension, schools, and Medicaid. There's hardly enough money.
Maybe Judge Lefkoe could call the four tops and the governor in.
Maybe she can solve all of this.
And say, guys, we need a deal.
Because our government's being run by a bunch of judges now anyway, with all the different consent decrees. That's how people are getting paid. Yeah. But it's interesting to say, well, maybe these folks should go to the top. And how can you argue that Medicaid recipients shouldn't be at the top unless you're running a pension fund? Yeah. Or unless you're, whatever else. What a mess. Mary Ann, thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks.
It's always great having you coming by. Just great to hear your perspective on things, and I really appreciate it. Okay. I hope you come back again sometime.
Of course.
We don't bother you too often, but once in a while we like to have you come by.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Mary Ann Ahern is, of course, with NBC5 here in Chicago, and she's a political reporter and Silver Circle Award winner, and we're really happy to have her here. Okay, now. In just a second or two, we're going to have a completely different show, and we're going to pick up this conversation about what's going on with the Reader and the Sun Times and Trunk and the Tribune. And I don't want you to go away because it's just, we're just going to clear the things and start another show. So watch this. In 10 seconds, we'll be back with another show right here on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Stay where you are.
From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
See? What did I tell you? 10 seconds. That's all it took to change the studio look. New guests, new everything. Everything's changed except the subject. And the subject is, where are we in the Sun-Times Reader-Tronc saga? Will the Sun-Times and Reader just get folded into the much larger company that owns the Tribune? And if that happens, raise your hand if you believe the promise that the newsrooms will continue to operate completely independently of one another. Well, I see a few hands out there. The matter seems to be in the hands of the Justice Department right now. You know, the one run by Jeff Sessions, who says he doesn't see any need to be meddling with the way the Chicago Police Department does its business. So why would he want to meddle with the ownership matters of the corrupt, failing, lamestream media? Well, that seems to be the question, and there is at least one viable alternative to Tronc, we think. And today we're going to try to figure out just how viable that is and try to get a handle on the emerging Chicago media landscape. And I'm very happy to have, for the first time at the table, Phillip Montoro, is the music editor of the venerable Chicago Reader. And you know, we love the Reader here on this show, so it's great to have you here, Phil. Thanks for coming by.
Appreciate it. I'm pleased to be here.
And David Roeder is with us once before when you were with the Sun-Times, writing about all kinds of real estate deals and all that.
Yes.
And then you went to work for Governor Quinn.
Yes.
And now you are doing independent work, and you are representing
the Chicago News Guild, which is the labor union for editorial department employees at the Sun-Times and the Chicago Reader, and we're deeply involved in all of this.
the very union to which you once belonged.
Exactly.
I suppose, right? You once
Yes.
belonged. Yeah. Well, I am very happy to have both of you here today because this is to me, this is a really big deal story. And I just think we really have to try to figure out what's going on. So, okay, you got these two newspapers. They're both owned by Wrapports. And Wrapports has announced that it wants to sell itself to Tronc, which owns I know it's hard to keep a straight face, but Tronc.
I thought Wrapports was hard.
Yeah. and there's a long sordid history of Tronc, and it goes all the way back to people buying the Tribune with ESOPs and all that stuff, employee buyouts. But here's where we're at today. Tronc owns the Tribune and a bunch of other things. Practically almost everything you pick up that's printed in Chicago today is owned in some way or another by Tronc. And you got this little company that owns these two newspapers, and they want to be subsumed into the Tribune, and you guys don't like that idea.
That's a fair way of putting it.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that there are members of the Wrapports board who don't like that idea either. I think they're pretty split.
Really?
But it largely has to do with their previous experiences with Michael Farrow at Tronc, like whether in working with him in the past they've made money or not. I mean, at the Reader we have our own more personal reasons. I think from what I'd heard, the Wrapports leadership attempted to interest other buyers first. I can't think of off the top of my head who they were, but clearly they didn't beat the bushes as thoroughly as they could have because we've managed to find some bidders in a very short time frame. So.
There was a report of them soliciting interest from some other newspaper publishing companies who mostly operate in the collar counties, but their game is not competitive urban markets and number two newspapers, in those markets. So they didn't get anywhere with that. However, we do believe the Wrapports board would like to keep the Sun-Times and the Reader around. I think an element of the board would like to keep the publications independent of the Tribune, but they do want out, and so that's where we are. They have accepted a so-called non-binding letter of intent from Tronc, while asking for other bids in a process that is being overseen by the Justice Department. And you mentioned justice earlier. I would say the antitrust lawyers there are engaged in this process. I think they're becoming aware of what the issues are here press competition, diversity in journalism, and all
That's
of that.
what this is to the Justice Department. This is an antitrust
This
case.
is an antitrust case, especially regarding the Sun-Times. We are asking, that is the union and its supporters have been asking the Justice Department to be flexible. Keep offers coming for a few days. They don't need to make a hasty decision on this. We've asked this through a petition on the Action Network. No News Monopoly is the hashtag we're using, and we're asking for support from people that way. Whatever your politics, whatever you think of Sun-Times versus Tribune. We think independent competition there is the real thing that we got to stand up for.
And who are the players now? Have the players changed? It's more than just Trunk, right?
Yeah, this Edwin Eisendrath, I think, is leading probably the most established opposing bid.
There's a bid that has been made by Edwin Eisendrath, who's a former Chicago alderman. He ran for governor about 10, 11 years ago. And he has been working very hard to put together money from other sources. And
He's not on the billionaire list, I don't think.
I don't believe so. No.
No, I think he's just got the M, not the B.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Yeah.
He's
But newspapers are cheap now.
yes, you can buy him cheap.
Right.
He's gotten some support from some unions affiliated with the Chicago Federation of Labor. He's been reaching out to others, and at that point, we've had to kind of keep our distance, even though we were talking with him before, some weeks ago, when he was gathering some basic information and trying to refine his strategy. There are some other potential or rumored bidders out there, including the developer Neil Bloom.
Neil Bloom.
Who's known now for his ownership of casinos around the country.
Including Rivers, I understand, right? He developed Rivers Casino.
Rivers and Des Plaines, yes.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that he had not made a bid by the deadline on Monday, but Dave seems to think that he's wealthy enough that they'll hold the door open for him.
Oh, is that
Yes.
right? Well, see, so it's always been so sort of murky about these deadlines.
The deadlines are not hard and fast things.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
All
not
Yes.
an established regulation. It's just,
Yeah.
all right, we're trying to move this process along. It's more or less arbitrary, and the DOJ can change their minds about
But
how
it
this
is
gonna work.
DOJ, it's their call, right? They can say, okay, we're done. We're going to make a decision now.
Yeah, but it's our hope that
You're
they-
you're skeptical about even that.
They're on matters like that. I think they're working closely with Wrapports, and they're talking to each other all the time. The Wrapports understands that it probably doesn't make sense for them to select a buyer that Justice isn't going to approve of.
So at this point, does Wrapports see you guys as hostile? Or are you kind of on the same side? I mean, everybody
There's
knows
always
everybody here.
There's always a certain amount of
Hesitate to
friction,
speculate.
union versus
Yeah.
versus the company.
Right.
And I know the company has not wanted a lot of information that they give to bidders. They don't want that shared with us, and we understand that. But in some ways, I guess we are allies, and we'd like to see the jobs preserved and the titles preserved.
That's what's so interesting about this landscape that we're in right now, is that people who would traditionally be adversaries are, the stakes are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It's like, wait a minute, we're all in this rowboat together here. Maybe we need to come up with something.
Yeah, the editor-in-chief at the Reader, Jake Malooly, he's an exempt, he's not a member of the union. He's considered management, technically, and has thus been on the other side of the table from the union throughout our protracted contract negotiation process.
But you are, we should mention, you are the union rep for the Reader, right?
unit chair, shop steward. I don't know.
But you
There's a lot
represent the workers. So you go to meetings and you sit on one side of the table, and Jake is on the other side with
often he is.
Jim Kirk.
When
and
he's
all
there,
those guys.
that's the side he sits on.
Right.
But I bring this up only to say that he has expressed to us support for the No News Monopoly campaign. That is, he thinks it's a good idea to do whatever we can to stay the Justice Department's hand and to let other bidders enter this process. I mean, we've had experience with Michael Farrow when he was at Wrapports.
Right. It's important to
and
point
it was
out that
it was not a
Wrapports-
salutary experience.
I'm sure it wasn't.
We also were very skeptical that Tronc has any motivation to continue operating the Reader. They wouldn't be required to in order to avoid antitrust sanctions, because I guess there are other papers in the city that would count as alternative weeklies or alternative papers, or I don't know, I think New City is a monthly now, but at any rate, wouldn't be subjected to the same kind of scrutiny. We don't print with the Tribune Company. They don't have a source of revenue from us the way they do with the Sun-Times, and they just turned the Red Eye into a weekly.
There's that other alt weekly you're talking about.
Yeah, well, since it's
So-called,
owned by
yes,
Tronc,
yeah,
that
yes.
would be a problem.
Yeah.
But there are allegedly others, depending on how you define the term.
It's important to point out for people who aren't following this quite as closely as we do that
Yeah,
Wrapports,
we don't have
the
much
owner
choice.
of these two papers, was a creation of Michael Farrow, who went on to create Tronc after he
Yeah.
put this in a trust and moved on to buy an interest in the Tribune.
And
became
we
the
were
big guy at
worried
the Tribune.
ever since we heard that he just parked his shares in a trust, his Wrapport shares, basically divested himself in this kind of sleight of hand way. We were like, oh, he's going to get those shares back. He's going to find a way, and he's going to try to combine these two companies.
Yeah.
I mean, we got so wrapped up in our contract fight that it still came as a surprise when they finally announced it. It was like, oh my God, it's so soon. But yeah, that was a fear of pretty much everybody in editorial at the Reader as soon as we heard that arrangement had
Well,
gone
obviously the biggest political issue here is this issue of editorial independence, right? I mean, and that's kind of tricky because we assume that reporters operate editorially independently anyway, but there is the editorial board position, and I could certainly see how Tronc would say, well, why would we want to be paying all these big fat salaries of all these editorial board members when we can just have one editorial board? But more importantly than that is the issue of competition, and I think that it just seems, as I said earlier, it almost defies logic to believe that when two almost identical companies are combined into one, that the competition remains. I mean, it just doesn't seem possible.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of newspaper mergers, these just don't work over the long term for the weaker newspaper. The advertising staffs get absorbed, and they always have the incentive to sell to the bigger audience, the bigger product.
That's already happened within Wrapports with respect to the Reader and the Sun-Times. There have been consolidations of business functions that have ended up hurting the Reader. That is, we don't have a dedicated circulation manager anymore. We don't have a sales manager. We don't have our own publisher. So there's really nobody specifically looking after the health of the business at the Reader anymore.
That's very interesting.
Well, it shows, I'm afraid to say.
I think in our campaign to try to get a contract for the Reader staff, they've been very good in showing neglect just on the business side of the property over several years.
So you're almost seeing a kind of a preview here. Wrapports is doing to the Reader what Tronc will probably do to the Sun-Times in a year or so.
Yeah.
That is the fear. I think I can, fairly state for the Sun-Times staff that is their fear, and certainly for the Reader staff as well. We just don't feel that that Tronc has any incentive to keep things going. Once they operate things for a while, maybe a year and a half, 2 years, and then they can say to the Justice Department, see, it failed. We gave it our best shot. Yeah.
Yeah, we really tried hard for a year, and it was just hard, so we're going to give it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll be the way this will go.
Anybody who buys these papers needs to know it's going to be hard.
It is going to be hard.
That's not an excuse.
That's right. But but the interesting part about it is that, as you said, it's a kind of a cruel joke, but you can pick these newspapers up for a relatively small amount of money, certainly compared to 10 or 20 years ago. And somebody with at least a reasonable amount of money could really begin to improve these papers. I mean, think about, we can talk about them individually, but let's just take the Sun-Times. Despite all of the issues that the Sun-Times has been going through in the last couple of years, it still survives. It still does journalism every day. I admire the hell out of it every time I pick it up and say, wow, they got an extra couple of pages in there today. There's even some ads in it. And I just keep thinking, what could it do if it had, well, we're not going to get a Bezos Washington Post kind of billionaire kind of thing, but if it had some money, it might be able to, and let me not say survive, it might be able to make the transition into a fully digital property in the next 10 years or something in a healthy way.
It's long been our contention that, having learned how to do more with less, that if we actually got any more, we could really thrive. The response
Wait,
to...
I want to write that down. After doing more with less, if we got just a little more, we could really thrive.
Yeah, I think when we had a rally back in October, I think that was one of my signs. We already do more with less. Think what we do with more.
Yeah.
But the response to the revenue downturn, which is industry-wide, at least in the case of the Reader, largely took the form of, okay, we're going to stop replacing people when they leave. We're going to eliminate positions, fold them into Sun-Times functions. It's basically just been a whittling down, a process of attrition. And I think most people who attempt to run for-profit companies understand that if you are losing revenue and you remove resources, it's very, very difficult to reverse that trend.
You're no longer a for-profit company. There's that.
Well, the Reader has a lot of goodwill in Chicago.
Yes, it does.
We have a deep community here.
You're looking at one of these people.
It shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be as difficult as it's proved to be to turn that goodwill into financial support for the company.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing for the Sun-Times too. The Sun-Times has residual goodwill, and despite its falling circulation, the goodwill, I think, is still there.
I think so, but it does need investment. It does need massive investment on the digital side.
Like anything else,
And
but a lot of the reason we oppose the Tronc deal has to do with why does the Reader, why does the Sun-Times enjoy that goodwill? And that has to do very strongly with outlook. What are the politics of these papers? Who do they speak for? What communities do they represent? Chicago is a very blue city. It's a majority-minority city. And the Sun-Times and the Reader are papers that spring from those concerns and address those concerns.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And let's just pull an example out of, say, what happened was it North Dakota, Greg Gianforte? Like when he assaulted that reporter.
Right?
Montana, yeah.
Was it Montana?
Yeah, it was Montana.
Why did I think it was North Dakota? That's very provincial of me, I apologize. But there was an NBC affiliate, a television station there recently purchased by Sinclair, that refused to cover the story, saying there were no verifiable facts. It has since apologized, but it's worth pointing out that Sinclair is the company that just bought Tribune Media.
Yeah.
And will now control local news in more than 200 markets. We can't put our heads in the sand and pretend that the media landscape is of some sort of detached, platonic ideal of perfect objectivity.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily want all the major outlets in Chicago to be owned by a company with conservative tendencies. That's not the city Chicago is.
Or even just by one individual, by one company that's heavily controlled by one human being. It's just a bad scene, no matter what it is.
I mean, I want to be fair to Tronc because, as you've mentioned, it has a lot of properties. And Chicago Magazine, for instance, just this week published a story about Sullivan High and Rogers Park.
Excellent piece.
The refugee students there, which was beautiful, just a wonderful piece. And I don't have to tell you that the conservative position in the United States, where refugees are concerned, is not a friendly one.
Yeah, and I think it also
so there's still room, but it's for how long?
It has to also be said, just in fairness, that also during the Tronc regime, the Tribune has continued to do excellent top-flight reporting, and so it's all very complicated. But we've only got like 2 minutes left here to try to sum this up. David, what happens now?
The bids will be evaluated by the company and by the Justice Department. Probably around the middle of the month, they will decide, okay, this looks the best.
Who decides that?
It will be
Wrapports or
Wrapports with the Justice
they'll
Department.
decide together?
Yes, decide together.
You won't have any say in it.
The union will not have any say.
Unfortunately, we're the playthings of the rich, as usual.
But we like to think we do have some influence on the margins here, and influence on the public and on the Justice Department, and in making sure there's as much opportunity as possible for bidders to come in.
Is there any channel through which you would like people to join you to?
Yes. On the Action Network, our petition, No News Monopoly, it works on Facebook and on Twitter as well.
So just Google No News Monopoly.
Right.
We'll put that on the screen
and
too.
sign our petition. We'll make sure it goes to the Justice Department.
Eisendrath, the other bidder we discussed earlier, has talked about wanting to maintain a journal of the 99%.
Well, that's a good move.
I think a slogan worth repeating, or at least saying out loud.
Unfortunately, we just ran completely out of time, but I really wanted to investigate this question about could the two papers be split up? What if somebody just wanted to buy the Reader? Can you summarize that in just a quick sentence or two? Would that be a good thing?
Because of the consolidation of business operations, that would be an expensive thing to do.
Because you'd have to replenish all of that stuff.
Require some investment into
so the Reader would be expensive.
But we'd be pleased to be in control of our fate again.
I bet you would.
And I think, especially if we remained paired with the Straight Dope. It's a property that the Reader originated in '73. Like, that could be a source of revenue.
And yes,
it's a well-trafficked site. People love it.
Guys, we got to go. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much to Phillip Montoro, the music editor of the Chicago Reader, and of course to David Roeder, who is representing the Guild. And we'll probably have you back here because this is not going to go away for a little while anyway, and I'd love to get more updates on it. Sure. Thank you very much for being here. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a production of Chicago's Can TV, right here, Can TV. And we'll be back again next week with another show. You can watch this and all the others by just going to this address. Thank you very much. See you next week. Bye.